Hello. In this second recording, we will address Chapter 2 in our text. And this chapter deals with needs identification, both from the perspective of needs within the project and also even the need for a project. I should state that this chapter views things from two slightly different perspectives that each will be important to you at various stages in your career. The first perspective, likely the more common perspective, is that of the project manager that will be executing the project for a customer. The second perspective, however, is the perspective of being the customer. In other words, putting out a solicitation for proposals to execute a project, to seek the project manager rather than be the project manager. So as you're reading this chapter, be aware of those two perspectives because they each cast a slightly different light on what we're going to be doing here. Now, I will say that this chapter is still fairly high level. We will not start getting into really lower level detail within a project until we reach closer to chapters 4 and 5, which will happen in a subsequent week. But remember, back to that life cycle image that we talked about during chapter 1, that these early decisions, the identification of needs, can make a huge impact on overall project execution because they set the direction for everything that is to follow. So what does it mean to identify a need? Recall that one of the characteristics that we must have for a project to be a valid project is a goal. What is it that the project is to accomplish? And this is really the highest level need, recognizing the problem that exists, the opportunity that exists. What is the need that the project is addressing? If you cannot clearly articulate this need, you're not ready to start the project. And in fact, starting the project would be catastrophic. You cannot reach a goal that is unknown. So, we need this definition of the need. Now, it's not enough for the need to just be a vague, general sense of some opportunity or problem. It needs to be clearly defined. And I would recommend that there be some type of a need statement, a problem statement. In my field of engineering, this is an extraordinarily important step. If you cannot write the problem out in detail, you are not ready to solve the problem. And that is very much true here in the project management situation. Now, writing the need means that you have to be able to provide some level of specificity to it. That means you need to quantify the problem. One way I like to encourage my students in engineering to address this is, can they put units on the problem? Now, let me explain what I mean by that. So let's say in an engineering scenario, the project is to design a better widget, whatever that widget happens to be. Maybe you're developing a better vacuum cleaner or a better aircraft or a better submarine. Regardless of what the device is, the same situation applies. Now, we need to think about what better means. Better in what way? Better in that it's lower cost and yet performs at the same level. Better in that it performs at a higher level at the same cost. Better in that it can be completed more quickly, or various combinations of those three, or perhaps even something else. Maybe better in that it's the same cost, the same effectiveness, but safer for the participants or the users of the device. So what do we mean by better? And can we quantify how much better is enough to justify the project? So can we put units on this? It's going to be cheaper by $10,000 or maybe $10 million. It's going to be 50% safer. It's going to be 25% stronger than the original design at the same cost. And so now we're starting to put quantitative measures with units, with measurable characteristics to the problem. This is incredibly important. The reason why is when we get to step 4, shown on this brief slide. Now we're going to think about, well, what is it going to take to do the project? We're going to have to determine the budget necessary to execute the project. And keep in mind, when we say budget, we're meaning all budgetary costs. So this is not only materials, but also time, HR resources, salaries, you name it. And so once we start putting a budget to the project, we have to decide, is there worth? Is there value? If we are not going to be able to perform this project in a way that adds value to our company or to our group or to our organization, whatever we happen to be in, then it's a questionable project. This is a very important first step because it really gets you off on the right foot on the project from the very beginning. If you miss this, everything kind of goes bad from this point on. Now, I put in blue here at the bottom a very important situation. I mentioned that this chapter looks at this situation from two perspectives, that of the project manager and the customer. And the text kind of makes it sound like the customer leads this. The customer knows what they want, the customer knows their own problem, and they're going to then ask the project manager or ask the corporate group to solve the problem for them. That might be ideal. That is certainly not always the situation, however. Many times the customer does not fully understand their problem. Many times the customer will need help from the project design team, from the project leader to better articulate the problem, the need, and to quantify that need. This slide addresses what will go into the typical request for proposal. Now, the request for proposal will generally be written by the customer, but again, there may be help or input from project managers or external contractors to help identify a few things along the way, but generally the overall document is going to be written by the customer. Sometimes it will be purely created by the customer with no input from anyone else in these early stages. That is very common as well. Now, on the left-hand side of this slide, I have listed the things that typically will appear within an RFP, request for proposal. These are the big sections of the RFP. As you read through the chapter, note what goes into these. You're going to have the statement of work, that clear identification of the need and what is being requested. You're going to have requirements for what success looks like and deliverables that need to be turned over to the customer at the end of the project. Perhaps that's a device, perhaps that's a completed structure or building or facility, perhaps it's a report. Perhaps it's an event. Maybe the project is you're putting on a class reunion or a wedding. Well, the deliverable is that the event goes off without a hitch. You're going to have a statement of customer supplied items. What is the customer putting into this? That could be in the form of financial, but it also could be in the form of various resources made available to the project team. There's going to be approvals that are required by the customer during the execution of the project. What things must the customer sign off on before the project team can execute or put those into place? This is very important because this provides a level of control to the customer that they need. It also provides a level of assurance to the project manager that they're staying aligned with the customer's needs. The type of contract will usually be spelled out. In other words, is this a set duration project? Is this a set financial contract, but maybe the time is more flexible? The nature of the contract. And the book will go into different types of contracts that are available and commonly used. So pay attention to those as well. And then finally, the payment terms. And this varies greatly on projects, how the payments will be handled, how cost overages are handled, things like that. All of these details matter. So these are the main items that will be in an RFP. Now on the right-hand side of this slide, I have put in some items that need to be recognized during the RFP process, more from the project manager's point of view, okay, the person that will be responding to the RFP. Okay, we have the required schedule for completion. So in other words, the RFP will typically have some terms as to when the project has to be done by. That means that the project manager needs to be very aware of these and make sure it's realistic to respond to the RFP. Can you perform the work in the timeline that's allowed and to do it with quality? Next is the instructions for submitting a response to the RFP. So in other words, the format and content that the proposals need to contain. This is extraordinarily important. Depending upon the area you're working in, this can make or break your proposal response. I have worked in some government contracts before of a research nature where if you don't follow the format to the letter of the law, they won't even read it. This is kind of like a go, no-go bar. If you follow the format, then they will consider your proposal. If you don't follow the format, then you're not even going to get a read. After this, we have the due date for the proposals. This actually kind of goes with the instructions on item 2, but I want to emphasize how important this is. Government contracts in particular are completely unforgiving in this area. If the proposal is due at 5 p.m. on Friday, then at 5:01 p.m. on Friday, you will not have your proposal read. You will be locked out of the system and you've missed the opportunity. Not only have you missed the opportunity, though, you've also already invested the time and money to write the proposal and it will not be considered. So you've actually lost resources. You've invested time, you've invested money, and there's no opportunity for return because your proposal won't be considered. So these details matter and need to be considered very carefully. Now, there will be usually, if it's done right, the RFP will spell out evaluation criteria. It will say how they're going to evaluate your response to the RFP. Will they be looking at only technical merit, or will they also be looking at financial issues, scheduling issues, things like that? If they provide you guidance on how they will be weighting the evaluation of your proposal, take those seriously. They put them in there for a reason. Finally, occasionally, the RFP will indicate the funds the customer has available. In other words, it may make it clear that they desire to spend approximately so much on this project. I have found, honestly, in my area that that's not always the case, but at times it is, especially on research contracts. They will usually say that they will not entertain proposals that exceed a certain amount. In other words, there's an upper bound. Don't ask for more than $1 million or $250,000 because it's not going to happen. If that is in the RFP, then certainly take it into consideration, but don't be surprised if it's not in the RFP. Now, this slide serves simply as a list of things to be looking for as you read. There's a lot more detail in the text, but I want you to know the items you need to be paying attention to as you read through, and take your own personal notes on those because those will be useful for you as you execute the class material. This last slide, before we end this brief overview, puts you into the position of the customer, the individual writing the RFP, for just a moment. And this is important because you need to understand things from the customer's perspective, even if you're not the customer at this particular stage. I want to emphasize two things. One is the method by which RFPs happen or are distributed. Typically, it's going to fall into these two categories. There may be other options, however, but these are the two big ones. One is that the customer or customers may identify a select group of contractors or companies to send the RFP to based on history with these contractors or reputation of these contractors or companies. So in other words, it won't be a general public solicitation for RFP. They will send it to groups that they feel are qualified. This is honestly probably more common than not. Imagine you're a customer that's needing a highly technical or a highly specialized or a very professional project to be executed. Not just anyone has the reputation to do that. You're probably going to only want people that are known to be qualified in this particular field of study in order to respond to the RFP. Now, certainly you could send it out to a broader group, but that means you may get a lot of RFP responses that are very suspect from the beginning, and it puts more work into the customer's basket, so to speak, to have to address or to evaluate all those proposals. So often they will just cut that process down by only sending to the people that they know to be qualified to respond. The alternative is to advertise more broadly, maybe in a business newspaper or a business publication or a technical publication that is specific to the field. That would allow them to reach a larger group, but yet the group is still at least interested in the field and likely to have a higher probability of being qualified to respond. It's very rare for an RFP to go out in a fully public publication like a general city newspaper, simply because the people who would read that are not likely qualified to be able to respond. Within your field of study, you will grow to understand the venues by which RFPs are distributed. And often these venues may be web-based venues as we move into a far more technically connected reality. Now, there are some guidelines on how these are typically distributed that I think are also important to know. The process is considered to be a competitive situation. What that means is that information should not be provided to one contractor that isn't provided to another. Now, can you, as a contractor, if you see an RFP, can you ask questions? Well, of course you can ask questions, but do not be surprised if the customer is unwilling to provide information as you ask questions. They are somewhat ethically obligated to provide the same information to all potential respondees or responders, I'm not sure which the right word is, so that they aren't being unfair to one contracting group over another contracting group. Actually, in my opinion, if a customer responds to your personal questions with details, that's probably, at least in my mind, a red flag as to, do I really want to work with that customer? Because that's setting that customer is setting themselves up to basically play favorites to different contractors. And maybe in this situation, it's to your advantage, but it may not always be. So just be aware of that. Now, sometimes what the customer will do, however, is hold a bidders meeting where all the people who are going to respond, all the contractors or corporate groups, can come in and ask questions in an open forum so that everybody can hear the answers. That is a totally different situation. That's great. If you choose to not avail yourself to that opportunity, then that's your choice. But you had opportunity as a contractor to get the same information that everybody else did. I should probably end this entire unit by saying that a formal RFP is not always used. Naturally, a customer doesn't have to use a general RFP and ask for multiple bids. It's usually in their best interest to get competitive bids and to have the competition going on because it works to their advantage. But in highly specialized scenarios, they may choose to just reach out to a direct contracting group and say, we want you to propose on this, without even going more broadly to others, due to reputation or due to history with that contractor. Okay, so we're going to call that a general overview of Chapter 2. As you're reading the chapter, be paying attention for these details, and I will go ahead and sign off at this point.